Vanakkam Dohadeva and everyone. Wonderful to be with you. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavai Tejasvinavaditamastu Ma Bindvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. And we'll share the screen. Easier to share the screen since I put a big date on it. Don't get it mixed up with all the other files. So today in Singapore is Sunday, July 31st. And our first topic, we're continuing with the great question we had last time about awareness and consciousness. Is awareness synonymous with consciousness? How do these two relate to the mind? So we'll do a really short review of a couple of major points, and then we'll move on to some new material. Oh, well, as you will remember, awareness is the witness. It's the observer. It's what is seeing something. It's not what is being seen, it's seeing. Sakshin in Sanskrit, the witness. Consciousness is what is being witnessed. So awareness is witnessing various states of consciousness. And as we mentioned, the word consciousness in English has so many different uses, it's a very confusing word. But these are states of consciousness, and it means what is being witnessed. And then we have our two examples. I am witnessing sadness. I is awareness, and sadness is the state of consciousness. I am witnessing inner light. I is awareness, and inner light is the state of consciousness. So the witness is the same in both. It's unchanged. What it is witnessing, the state of consciousness it is witnessing, is different in these two examples. So next we're adding awareness consciousness is found in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, so don't panic. We're keeping it pretty simple. And we start with the term yoga. In modern times, in both the East and West, the term yoga has become approximately synonymous with the yoga asanas or postures. And the goal of this approach to yoga is quite often simply the health-oriented benefits. So health-oriented benefits are okay, but it's misinterpreting the meaning of yoga. Typical description from one yoga studio website indicates yoga increases the circulation of oxygen-rich blood, nourishing and detoxifying the internal organs, musculature, cardiovascular, immune, endocrine, digestive, reproductive, and nervous systems. Sometimes mental benefits are also mentioned, such as improving concentration, clarity of mind, and reducing stress. The goal of each Hindu tradition is to provide practices through which an individual can sufficiently mature his or her divine nature to achieve liberation from rebirth. So the goal is the same. The goal of yoga is the same. Liberation, moksha, mukti. So when we say we're practicing yoga to reduce stress, that's missing the depth of what the practice is for. It's like stopping at mathematics when you can add and subtract, rather than going on through all the advanced uses that mathematics can provide answers to more complicated questions. So that's something you can keep in mind when you run into I don't want to call it misrepresentations of yoga. It's a very shallow understanding of yoga. Yoga is like every other Hindu tradition that has the same goal, moksha. So the traditions don't have different goals. They just have different paths. So that's our path going up the mountain there. The different traditions provide different paths, some focusing on service, others on devotion, others on meditation, and still others on spiritual knowledge. In Hindu scripture, the earliest usage of the term yoga as applied to spiritual endeavor has the meaning of. Oh, that's a question for you. What do you think the earliest usage of the term yoga in Hindu scripture, what was the meaning that it had? Certainly wasn't asanas. So this is even before the Yoga Sutras were written. The answer, in Hindu scripture, the earliest usage of the term yoga as applied to spiritual endeavor has the meaning of the control of the mind and senses. Nothing to do with asanas. Control of the mind and senses. And of course, that's the sense in which the term yoga is used in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. He starts right off with that, which we'll look at in a minute. And the path that Patanjali gives to accomplish spiritual maturation leading to liberation focuses on the practice of meditation and is a path of purification, control, and transcendence of the mind. So we're working with the mind, and that's something we kind of take for granted. Patanjali, yes, so it's about the mind, mental activity, concentration. But this was written 2,000 years ago. How many religions were concerned about the mind 2,000 years ago? Not that many. So it's a very advanced concept for 2,000 years ago, and even today, when it comes to religion. Yoga Sutra is written circa 200 BCE, codified the ancient yoga philosophy, meaning Patanjali isn't creating something new. He's not writing a totally new revelation. He's writing down the common understanding of yoga, codifying it. His system is one of 6 classical philosophical systems. So philosophical systems are called darshanas. So it's known as Yoga Darshana in looking at it as a philosophy. 6 traditional philosophical systems of Hinduism. We have Yoga Darshana. In English, it's also called classical yoga. Gurudeva uses that one a lot in the trilogy. Doesn't use Yoga Darshana. In the classical yoga teachings, this, and this. It's also called Raja Yoga, the royal yoga, and Ashtanga, or 8-limbed yoga. So we're not going through the limbs today. We're trying to focus on awareness and giving a little background. Our next concept is on yoga as a disunion. Some of you probably haven't heard that idea before. In general usage, the Sanskrit word yoga means union. In Hindu philosophy, the union referred to is that of the individual self with the Supreme, Atman, Brahman, Jiva, Shiva. However, the process which the term yoga refers to in the Yoga Sutras is one of separating rather than joining. So this is interesting that the Merriam-Webster dictionary has really described it accurately. I was totally surprised to see how accurate it is. Yoga, capitalized, meaning it's the philosophy, a Hindu theistic philosophy teaching the suppression of all activity of body, mind, and will in order that the self may realize its distinction from them and attain liberation. Oh, really well written. And this, of course, it's a Western book. So that the self may realize this distinction it's separating from body, mind, and will. Awareness is separating from consciousness. And thereby attains liberation, which is the goal of yoga. And it uses the word theistic, which means devotion to Ishvara is part of the process. Dr. Feuerstein stated this idea as follows. According to one definition, especially popular among Vedanta and Neo-Vedanta followers, yoga means union. Although this may be correct as regards certain forms of yoga, it is definitely inapplicable to Patanjali's Kriya Yoga. So he likes to call classical yoga Kriya Yoga, because it's Kriya to him is the essence of it, whose essence consists rather in a disunion, namely the disjunction of the Purusha and the world. So Purusha is another word for awareness, and world is another word for consciousness. So we're trying to separate awareness from consciousness, Purusha from the world. The world is also called Prakriti, or gunas. The idea of a disunion is, in fact, the first concept presented in the classical yoga teachings of the Yoga Sutras. Get the first couple of verses. First verse, now the exposition of yoga. Next few verses. Yoga is the restraint of mental activities. That's our definition, the ancient definition of yoga, controlling the mind. Then awareness abides in its natural state. Otherwise, awareness identifies with the mental activities. So that's what we're going to look at. Awareness identifying with the mental activities. What does that mean? So unless we're restraining the mental activities, which in Sanskrit is called chitta vritti, mental activities, awareness identifies with the mental activities. But if we're restraining the mental activities, then awareness is separate from the mental activities, meaning it's able to be the witness. In other words, the state referred to in verse 3, then awareness abides in its natural state as a result of awareness disuniting with the mental activities and remaining temporarily aware only of itself until thoughts again arise. And of course, this is the first way disunion takes place, and is generally for an extremely short period of time. We don't manage to stop mental activities for very long. But in whatever period that was, 5 seconds, 2 minutes, we managed to separate awareness from the mental activities, or awareness from consciousness. Then we have the same quote from Gurudeva. It's worth repeating. Consciousness and awareness are the same when awareness is totally identified with and attached to that which it is aware of. So consciousness is the same as Patanjali's mental activities. Chitta vritti. To separate the two is the artful practice of yoga. Then we have my common example. I hold up a piece of paper and say, I see the paper. That makes sense, right? I see the paper. If I say, I am the paper, how many of you would think that? No one. We're trained that we are not physical objects. We perceive them. We see the paper. We smell the incense. We hear the water moving. That's the way we think. But then we say, I am happy. We are the happiness, but we are not the paper. In the terminology of Patanjali's first few verses, happiness is the mental activity that awareness has identified with. The idea is to distinguish ourselves from what is mental in the same way we distinguish ourselves from what is physical. We don't want to say, I am happy. We want to say, I, as awareness, perceive there's an emotion called happiness in there. But I'm the perceiver of happiness, meaning the witness. My emotions are currently in a state of being happy. But I am perceiving that. That isn't who I am, just like I am not the paper. So that's what we're learning to do. Separate awareness from consciousness and be the witness. And it requires watching our language. I am hungry. Is awareness hungry? Of course awareness isn't hungry. Physical body's hungry. I am bored. The mind is bored. So, but you're the witness of what is bored. I am the witness that my mind is bored. In classical yoga, second way in which disunion takes place is in deep meditation, which is the idea of a sustained experience of pure awareness. Then we get the Yoga Sutras 1718, Samadhi that is accompanied by Vitarka, Vichara, Ananda, Rasmita is Samprajñata. The other, Asamprajñata, Samadhi follows the former. So we don't have to know what all that means. Upon the practice of the notion of cessation and only has samskaras as residuum. The meaning of these four terms is vitarka, the thought process, when concentrating on a gross object. Vichara, the thought process when concentrating on a subtle object. Ananda, we all know that, bliss. And asmita, I amness, concept of being a person. So when all those are missing, gross concept, subtle concept, bliss, and I amness, that's called asamprajñata samadhi, or objectless samadhi. The technique leading to and the experience of the state of unified consciousness beyond all cognitive content, asamprajñata samadhi. In this superlative condition, subject and object become one. This realization presupposes a temporary deconstruction of the ordinary consciousness. All that is left is a residuum of subconscious tendencies called samskara. In other words, when we manage to still the mind in a prolonged sense in meditation, there's no conscious mental activity, but the subconscious mind hasn't gone away. It hasn't been transformed. So that's what they call residuum of subconscious tendencies, called samskara. Then Gurudev explains, pure awareness, aware only of itself, superconsciousness, core of consciousness. So this is the same idea. How do we separate awareness from consciousness? Or a description of separating awareness from consciousness. So Patanjali said, you just stop the thoughts for a few minutes, or you go into deep meditation, given us two ways. So here's Gurudeva. Pure awareness, aware only of itself, is a fairly simple state to attain. So we don't want a barrier that this is hard to attain. But it does take a long time to be able to sustain that state for more than an instant or two. So Gurudeva again is referring to just what Patanjali did. You stop it for a few minutes, few seconds, it comes right back. Ask anyone and they will tell you that they can at any moment become aware that they are aware. To remain longer in this state than a fleeting second does take practice. The breath should be well regulated and the nerve system harmonized, and the meditator should have made peace within himself, with family and friends, and be steadfast in this practice before the state of pure awareness can be held for longer periods of time. Has to be content, satisfied. Otherwise, the lower mind is constantly rambling on about this or that if we're discontent. So we had two ways. Now we have a third way. The third way disunion takes place is at the time of moksha, liberation from rebirth. The last verse in the Yoga Sutras is on this, the ultimate disunion. So this one you can't undo. The involution of the gunas, which are now devoid of purpose for the Purusha, is what is called kaivalya, or the establishment of the power of awareness in its natural state. So it's a permanent establishment. In other words, this is the mind, the world, Purusha, Prakriti, this is Purusha awareness. And when they're separated and the world, the mind goes away, that's kaivalya. It's a permanent establishment of the power of awareness in its natural state. No longer capable of identifying with consciousness. The purpose of the gunas is twofold: to provide experience and finally liberation to the Purusha. In kaivalya, the world is permanently gone. Only Purusha exists, turned in on itself. Then we get the summary. As stated at the beginning of the Yoga Sutras, when mental activity is restrained, the soul's faculty that witnesses thoughts naturally turns in on itself. However, this is temporary and only lasts until thoughts again arise. Same thing Gurudeva said. In meditation, it is much longer, but when you end your meditation, the separation ends. Whereas in kaivalya, the power of awareness is permanently established in itself. So, of course, you can't have a physical body anymore at that point. So that's the idea of separation. How we separate, three ways of separating and overcoming the tendency to identify with. And watching our vocabulary. Instead of saying, I am happy, I can say, boy, my emotions are kind of buoyant today. I wonder why that is. You can witness it instead of calling it you, calling it I. This is an interesting one. When a person attains self-realization, does he become a Satguru? Or are Satgurus different souls than the rest of humanity? So I have an indirect answer. Starts with a story in chapter 7 of the booklet Gurudeva's Spiritual Visions. Short stories that are very inspiring. It is entitled The Inner Navigator and introduces the concept of intuition, or listening to one's inner self. It reads, while I was waiting in Phoenix, deciding whether to open my organization there, he eventually chose San Francisco, I had another experience one day while driving my small car. My inner self told my outer self, look at that sign. If any of you have been to Phoenix, you know it's totally a flat area, absolutely flat. There I was driving around this big flat area where there were lots of houses and homes. Look at that sign. Remember the sign? It was Spruce Street. I took note of the sign. Then I said, okay, I'm just going to get into my inner self. Inner self said, drive 20 blocks forward, turn left, drive 10 blocks, turn right, Drive 5 blocks, turn left, 2 blocks, turn around, back up, go 10 blocks, and on like that for about 2 hours as I followed the instructions. Then it said, stop and look at the sign. Spruce Street. It's back where he started. I was a believer in myself, an absolute believer in myself. The book also contains in Chapter 4 the story of Gurudeva meeting his Guru Yogaswami of Jaffna, Sri Lanka. There are many groups of Yogaswami devotees in Western countries, particularly in Canada and Australia. When I talk to them about Yogaswami and Gurudeva, part of the talk always makes reference to Yogaswami being a great yogi who would sit for hours, even in deepest meditation, even days in deepest meditation. I noticed a common response in the different groups, which was to readily recognize Yogaswami's greatness, but put him on a tall pedestal, so to speak, without any thought that Yogaswami's high spiritual attainments are also our potential, the spiritual destiny of each soul to be reached at some point in this or a future life. Gurudeva makes this point in the Clear White Light chapter, merging with Shiva. Occasionally in a cross-section of the inner mind, when light merges into transcendental form, the young aspirant may view the golden actinic face of a master peering into his, kindly and all-knowing. Well, the next sentence is the one that's important. He is looking at his own great potential. Therefore, in reading the 14 stories in Gurudeva's spiritual visions, keep in mind this idea that the visions, intuitions, and other mystical experience of Gurudeva are something you can eventually experience in this or a future life. In holding this perspective, reading about Gurudeva's experiences gives added motivation to your own spiritual practices. Relating all of this to our question about the Satguru, all human souls have the potential of having the same realizations as the Satguru. All human souls are the same. Animal souls are different, but all human souls are the same. Satgurus aren't a different kind of soul. However, there's another aspect to answer to the question. However, there is another aspect to the answer to the question. That aspect starts with the definition of the term guru. So we all know guru. Literally, it means weighty one, indicating an authority of great knowledge or skill, a term used to describe a teacher or guide in any subject, such as music, dance, sculpture, but especially religion. For clarity, the term is often preceded by a qualifying prefix. Hence, terms such as Kulaguru, family teacher, Vinaguru, Vina teacher, and Satguru, spiritual preceptor. So that's basically saying Guru and Satguru are not synonymous. Guru just means a teacher. No, mathematics teacher, English teacher, all kinds of teachers, particularly if they're looked at as being experts, can be called gurus. So we need a word in front of it, such as Satguru. So that leads to the question, what does the word Sat mean? True, existing, good, reality, existence, truth. So that's a lot of different meanings. So let's take the last one, truth, with a capital T. So truth guru, teacher of truth. Therefore, a Satguru is someone who helps you realize the truth that is resident within you. So it's not, we're not supposed to look at the Satguru as some great being, beginning and end of process. No, the Satguru is a teacher to help you to realize the truth that is resident within you. Like any teacher, trying to teach a skill to the student. In this case, it's realizing their spiritual nature rather than an external skill. So now we get a new idea, which you may not be familiar with. After Nirvikalpa Samadhi, the sannyasana has a choice to serve mankind or to wait for mankind to unfold into the consciousness that he has attained. This is called being a bodhisattva or upadeshi, one who serves, or an arahat or nirvani, one who waits. So those are synonymous terms. Bodhisattva, upadeshi are synonymous. Arahat, nirvani, synonymous. The golden body begins to grow through service and by bringing others into enlightenment as a bodhisattva, or through the constant practice of Nirvikalpa Samadhi while living a strictly secluded life as an arahat, only mixing with those of his own level of realization. In other words, all realized beings do not automatically choose to become Satgurus. Satguru has to be someone who's teaching students to improve their experience of the truth within themselves. Even though someone is the most enlightened being, if he's not teaching students, he's not looked at as a Satguru. He's not a teacher. He's a nirvani, great realized being who doesn't teach. Then we get our usual balancing factor here, our character qualities. Great gentleness, 27th character quality from our character building workbook, and we start as usual with the definition. How would you define gentleness? It's an easy one. Workbook gives this definition. Gentleness means being kindly, tender, and mild-tempered. I practice it by speaking and behaving in a pleasant, soothing, even-tempered manner. The opposite is harshness. And Gurudeva's quotes, just a little bit of kindness is so easy to express. Just a little bit of kindness heals the mind. And in this day and age, when so many are frustrated, troubled, and need a little bit of help, appreciation and encouragement, your kindness can help. Next one. Very simply, ahimsa is abstaining from causing harm or injury. It is gentleness and non-injury, whether physical, mental, or emotional. It is good to know that nonviolence speaks not only to the most extreme forms of forceful wrongdoing, while ahimsa goes much deeper to prohibit even the subtle abuse and the simple hurt. Comparing the actions of one who is gentle to one who is harsh. First situation, in response to a friend's annoying behavior, you, gentleness, may become irritated but remain calm and do not react. Harshness, become irritated and deliver a mean rebuke. Second situation, in correcting a misbehaving younger sibling, you, gentleness, speak calmly and kindly without getting upset. Harshness, tend to be rough on her and speak harshly. Third situation, in training your dog to sit and stay, you, gentleness, make corrections softly and persistently to good effect. Harshness, severely pull his leash and issue strident commands. And we have a reflection. Take a moment to identify a few ways in which you could improve in gentleness. And our assignment during these 2 weeks, focus on each incident. When you are tempted to speak harsh or strident words, find a gentle and kind way to respond. Thank you very much. Oh.